Hello, everybody. As some of you know, that our first webinar that was arranged by the International School of Shoifat Alumni Association took place on this past Saturday, on the 9th of May. It was titled Climate Change in the Era of COVID-19 by Ghina Annan. This webinar, it did receive a lot of credit, and it was enjoyed by many of those who've seen it on real time. The first webinar was, as I said, was arranged by the International School of Shoifat Alumni Association, but we have got plans underway that many future webinars will take place, and these will be done in an association with the other schools in Lebanon, with International School of Shoifat in Kura and Sabis Adma, and we are looking forward to that. So, for the rerun of this lecture, I will be introducing Ghina Annan, who received her Bachelor and Masters of Engineering degrees in Applied Energy from the American University of Beirut in 2013. She is recognized among the most experienced sustainability specialists in this country. She is a member of several technical committees, including but not limited to Global Climate Change, Ashreya Committee, and a board member in the Association of Energy Engineers Lebanon chapter, and the Council on Women in Energy and Environmental Leadership. She's currently a board member and treasurer of the International School of Shoifat Alumni Association. It gives me great pleasure to reintroduce Ghina Annan to listen to her about climate change in the era of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aid. I'm thrilled to be welcoming you all to our first webinar for the series of Food for Thought, of course, inspired and prompted by our ISC Alumni Association. Today, I will be talking to you about the climate change in the era of COVID-19. So, we all know that air pollution is really hazardous, and it claims more than 7 million lives each year. And including this climate change, along with the greenhouse gas emissions, they contribute to 1.1 temperature rise. This is in addition to all the ecological, physical, and health impacts. Apparently, the COVID-19 crisis shutdown decreased the air pollution. However, is this reduction sustainable? So as the lockdown lifts, will it be business as usual again? Will the economy be reshaped to decrease the smog and the smoke that is being produced? So there are clear solutions for the climate change mitigation and the greenhouse gas emission reduction that actually meet our climate targets and doesn't require people to stay at home and doesn't require to hold on the economy status. From a key point perspective, climate experts say that we need to find ways to reduce those emissions and decrease on the climate change without holding the economy and keeping people locked down in their houses. I will be sharing with you a global temperature variation video that is put by NASA, and you will see a color-coded map from 1884 until 2013. And the dark blue colors are basically showing the temperatures that are cooler than the average temperature, while you will see that with time, the temperature will increase, and it is noted with the dark red colors. So, do you think that us as humans, we are associated with the climate change? Based on the IPCC work, it is important to know that meteorologists and oceanographers compare the climate patterns they observe with patterns developed using sophisticated models of the Earth's atmosphere and the ocean. And by matching the observed and the modeled patterns, the scientists can positively identify the fingerprints. And we can see that from 1990 up until 2013 timeline I'm showing here. So scientists agree today that the warming is primarily caused by humans putting too much carbon into the atmosphere. And this is by burning coal, oil, gas, and cutting down and burning forests. So the chart here on the side, you will see that the carbon dioxide emissions by each sector. And we can tell that globally, around half of the global emissions are a result of electricity and heat produced by 2014. And then transport and manufacturing industries both contribute approximately to 20%. The residential, commercial, and public services around 9%. We're left with 1 to 2% with other sectors. Now, how does greenhouse effect warm our planet? And what is global warming? The global warming, it refers to the gradual increase in the observed or projected in the global surface temperature. And this is due to the radiative forcing caused by the anthropogenic emissions or the emissions caused by human beings. So here the bar graph shows the global warming potential, or each of the gases that contribute to the global warming. And we can see that we have carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases. And the highest is the fluorinated gases, or the F gases, which have the highest potential on the global warming. And us as humans, from the pie chart, we contribute to 76% on carbon dioxide, followed by methane 16%, nitrous oxide 6%, and fluorinated gases 2%. Now, the map here, it shows the total greenhouse gas emissions measured in tons of carbon dioxide equivalents all over the world by continent and by countries. Now, how can we translate all the data that I have been saying here for future? Like, how can I understand the future scenarios that I have on the table? I can translate them into 5 scenarios, and I can start by considering no climate policy. So if we continue by not following any climate policy, the estimated warming would be 4.1 to 4.8 degrees Celsius by 2100. And now, if the current climate policies that we see in Europe and in USA, if they continue by following them, maybe the temperature will decrease to become, the temperature delta T, it will decrease to become 3.1 to 3.7 degrees C. However, there are natural pledges such as the Paris Climate Agreement, and it's really tough and it's really important to follow. And if we do follow, the estimated average will decrease to become 2.6 up until 3.2 degrees C. There are 2 optimistic, very optimistic scenarios, which is the 1.5 and the 2 degrees consistent. And this really requires significant increase in ambition of the current pledges, similar to the one for Paris Agreement. So the coronavirus happened, and it's the first and foremost an issue of human health and safety. But as people have changed their everyday behavior and patterns to contain and avoid the virus, there are some subtle events that affected our environment. So most of the people who came and attended our webinar, they were really interested to know if this lockdown due to coronavirus really was good to the environment. And the satellite images seems to prove just that. So in Italy, for example, where people were living in lockdown for weeks, the traffic nearly stopped, the nitrogen dioxide levels clearly dropped. In Germany, for example, might have reached its climate goals as the corona lockdown caused the economy to produce way much less CO2. The factories, devoted workers, thousands of flights have been canceled and streets are empty because people are working from home instead of driving to the office. Also, like China, the air pollution sunk dramatically between December and March when the quarantine was. So thick smog has given way into blue skies because the factories were closed, the reduced capacity power plants, and fewer cars on the road. So yes, it's bad for the economy, but from a climate perspective, the coronavirus pandemic was not entirely negative. The corona pandemic measures have been implemented immediately, and it cut down the emissions drastically. While if we wanted to implement the climate measures, it would have taken us years for them to come into effect. So I'll start by checking the China daily patterns because after all, it all started in China. So here we have the graph illustrates how the decrease in industrial transportation and business activity since the coronavirus outbreak. And you can see the reduced levels of nitrogen dioxide over China. Although researchers and us, we all know that a decrease in one pollutant does not necessarily mean that there's suddenly the country is healthy. So a carbon brief also indicates here in this graph that key industries that were operating at much lower levels than normal levels during the quarantine. And as a result, the carbon dioxide emissions were almost at least 25% less during the weeks before and after the New Year of China. So, however, the CO2 emissions for the 2 weeks, all in all, they contribute to approximately 1% reduction on the annual totals. So it's not as optimistic. So if I want to analyze what's happening all over the world and I need to check the climate forcing pollutants, so what are the pollutants that I really need to focus on? It's the particulate matter 2.5 or PM 2.5 and NO2. So the NO2 mainly comes from burning fossil fuels, and this is due to anthropogenic emissions caused by human beings, and also the particulate matter 2.5, which is an air pollutant that is harmful to the health because it travels deep to the lungs. So the variation in both those 2 pollutants can be an indicator. So before, pre, and post of the climate change of the COVID-19. So I will start with Wuhan, where it all started. China also happens to be one of the most polluted nations in the world. Wuhan was put under complete lockdown on the 23rd of January. You can see that in the vertical black line. And it's also giving us the longest perspective of the lockdown up until March, where we can see that both the levels of PM 2.5 and NO2 have decreased. Moving to Italy, where we all know that Italy, it was one of the hardest hits in a nation in this crisis, and they went into lockdown on March 10. This is represented by also the vertical line in black. We can see that the NO2 levels did decrease. However, the PM 2.5 did not much reflect on the changes. So we have regional uncertainties, such as this is due to the regional uncertainties like clouds, shiny surfaces, atmospheric mixing, and the properties of PM 2.5. And this can be solved if we can measure this on. We need to take 2 or more weeks to fully assess how the absence of human beings from the roads really affected the PM 2.5 levels. So we can move now to France, where it went into lockdown on March 16. The effect of fewer cars again, and industrial emissions are very clear because we can see how NO2 levels are reaching low levels. Again, the PM 2.5 needs 2 to 3 weeks to fully assess how it affected the human absence. Los Angeles, it is among the first states that was affected in coronavirus, and we can see that the results are quite visible after the lockdown on March 16. If we really want to see an impact on a country due to COVID-19, we must check India, because if you see that after March 25, when the country went into lockdown, the results of both particles really decreased. Those two emissions decreased simultaneously. So finally, in Spain, Spain went into lockdown on March 14, and both the PM 2.5 and NO2 went into significant decrease. So if you want to really assess this and compare the first quarter of 2020 to the first quarter of 2019, we can notice that the global CO2 emissions were over 5% lower in 2020 when compared to 2019. And this is mainly due to 8% decline in emissions of coal and 4.5% from oil, 2.3% from natural gas. So the CO2 emissions fell more than energy demand. And this is really important to notice that those CO2 emissions decrease in regions that really suffered the most, such as China and European Union, which is -8 degrees, and the United States, which is -9 degrees. And if we project this over the whole full year, the global CO2 emissions are expected to decline to 8% lower than 2019, which is really 6 times larger than the previous record reduction. Now, an interesting graph, which I find important to assess, is basically the reduction in the energy demand due to the lockdown periods. So the lockdown periods, it's really divided into 3 periods: the limited restriction, partial lockdown, and the full lockdown. And we can see that in the limited restriction, the energy demand was reduced by 17%. Then in the partial lockdown, the reduction it increased to 27%, and then the full lockdown was 33% reduction in the energy demand, which is really significant. Now, finally, if we projected the change in primary energy demand by fuel in 2020 relative to 2019, we compare the coal, gas, oil, nuclear, and renewables to the total energy demand, and we noticed that 6% decline would be more than 7 times the impact of the 2008 financial crisis on the global demand, which is interesting because we are reversing the growth of the global energy demand over the last 5 years. So if we want to learn from the COVID-19, how could the COVID-19 help us to fight the climate change? This is an important timeline, which starts with basically rethinking the risk. And this, we learned that it took us an unfolding disaster like COVID-19 to prompt the government and businesses and individuals to act at this scale required. And similarly, for the climate change, this scale is required to urgently treat this issue. Listening to global perspectives. So a growing understanding that we inherently connected to people. Look at what China did towards Italy, the help that was among the people. This is really recognized, and the connection among the people, among different geographies at these circumstances, we can build on this strong momentum and fight the climate change together. Third, making people the top priority. So many people are rearranging their lives, practicing social distancing, offering elderly neighbors help, and volunteering in like facilities, food banks. This is showing the power that can be unleashed when people are united for a common cause. So we need to harness this wave of compassion and proactivity to really protect the vulnerable people, and including the ones that are exposed to the climate impacts. Finally, before the last, the trusting experts, we see on all the social media that really doctors have been held up as heroes. And seeing that, it makes us trust the doctors, and we should do so by trusting the climate scientists and the policy advisors as well, because we need to win the climate fight too. The last, which is really most important in my opinion, which is the making a culture shift, because like we are now and many others are working from home, and this cultural shift which we always thought cannot happen, those are many aspects of the COVID-19 response to the types of changes that we need to do. So what is interesting is that many necessary shifts just require a change in culture, and it's really necessary to do that. So we need to apply them. How can I be a part of this? And what are the solutions that are within my reach? So as it is said, there's a solution to each and everything. Definitely there are solutions to climate change as well. And one of the solutions that we are proposing is stopping cutting the trees, because with forest management and proper paper recycling, there is always a chance to have an equilibrium maintained from cutting the trees and planting new ones. So planting new trees will quickly reduce the rate of emissions. So for example, one can get used furniture instead of buying a new one. Controlling population, which is really important, because if the population is controlled, the climate change can be controlled. So more people put more requirement on the planet, like resources, food, and shelter, which is really a huge utilization of the planet. Less use of fossil fuels. So if we reduce the use of fossil fuels, the change can be improvised. Because when we burn on diesel, petrol, and other products, they all lead to global warming, which lead to climate change. So we need to use electric cars if we can afford them, or use walkability or carpooling, anything that would really help the planet from decreasing its emissions. Unplugging devices. All our houses have contained dozens of appliances, including air conditioners, televisions, microwave, washing machines, and these devices really lead to global warming and hence climate change. So these appliances consume more energy when they are switched off. So we need to make sure that they are unplugged. So unplugging all appliances is really necessary when not in use. Focusing on renewable energy. Fossil fuels will be finished in a couple of decades, and this is a fact. So we really need to move towards the renewable energy. And in many parts of the world, this has been implemented. So what types of solar renewable sources there are? We have wind, we have tidal, we have ocean. So we can invest them because they are infinite and not finite like the fossil fuels. Controlling the methane leaks, especially in Lebanon, we have much of methane leaks due to the waste that is being dumped. Instead of making use of this methane in order to produce electricity, this is being a contributor to the greenhouse gases, and this is causing climate change. So methane is a potent greenhouse gas that is more potent than carbon dioxide itself. So every month we have a huge quantity of methane leaks from pipeline, from storage tanks, from infrastructure, garbage dumps and coal mines, and tons of garbage is being disposed into landfills, and we can see it every single day. Now, last, which is tougher emission and efficiency standards. So every time we put a law and people follow, this is more appropriate for people to have it in a frame, and so that they can understand the harmful gases that are being released from the automobiles or the power plants that we have all over the globe. So there are rules that have been put in several countries, such as the rate of emissions of 10% put in USA. So we can do similar or even better in all other countries, and we can reach our aim, which is having a better climate and less global warming greenhouse gas emissions. On a personal level, what can I do? There are many steps that each and every individual can take to take control of the climate change, and every small step that we do is actually a big step into a better change. And starting with driving less or carpooling, making our houses more tight, buying a programmable thermostat to make sure our indoor temperatures is really within the range that doesn't require us to have the air conditioning on all the time, eating less meat, especially beef, which causes us to have all this rainforest and more methane emissions, using power strips in our home office, upgrading the refrigerator when it's more than 5 years, because as it becomes older, it becomes less efficient, and buying new Energy Star equipment, it is really more efficient from spending more energy. Changing the light bulbs to LED bulbs, because LED bulbs are way more efficient, up to 75% more efficient than the conventional incandescent bulbs. And washing clothes in cold water instead of hot water, because all the energy is basically used and to heat the water for washing the clothes instead of washing the clothes. So we can save a much of energy when washing the clothes in cold water. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Rena, very much for this elegant display of data and information. I hope for everybody that they have witnessed the simply by lockdown and changing our habits, changing our ways of life, using less energy, how the planet has tried to recover and to get back to some kind of normality. So I hope this was informative for all, and look forward to seeing you in future webinars.